Welcome to The Debate, a special presentation of the WeCyberYou Unlocked podcast. Imagine a company that has flawlessly implemented every single technical security control in the book.
Okay.
Their firewalls are just absolute walls of code. Their passwords are cryptographically secure. And yet a single shift in market dynamics or, an overlooked operational vulnerability bankrupts them in a month.
Wow.
Yeah. And why? Because they focused entirely on technical compliance and they just completely forgot about broad organizational risk.
I mean, that is the terrifying reality of modern business right there. And before we dive into how to prevent that exact nightmare, we invite you to follow the channel and visit WeCyberYou.com for more content like this.
Normally when we talk about keeping an organization safe, we expect rigid engineering.
Sure.
Foundation, you find a crack, the inspector points at it and says, fix that exact crack to these specific specifications.
Right. We want it to be binary, compliant or non-compliant, pass or fail, especially in areas like cybersecurity. We like things to be visible, categorized, and strictly mandated.
Yeah, exactly. But then you step into the broader world of organizational risk and uncertainty, and suddenly that compliance checklist feels totally inadequate.
Yeah, it falls apart.
It really does. We're looking at a landscape that's far more fluid and infinitely more complex, which brings us to our focus today. ISO 31000, which is known as the Blueprint for Organizational Risk Intelligence.
A bold title?
It's an international standard providing the principles, a framework, and a process for managing risk across an entire organization. And what makes it so fascinating is that it isn't limited to cybersecurity.
Right, it applies to all types of risk. So financial, operational, strategic, reputational, and of course, cyber.
Yes, and its ultimate claim is that it helps organizations make better decisions, reduce uncertainty, protect value, and just improve overall performance.
So here is the core question we are exploring today. Does ISO 31000's overarching, non-certifiable flexibility make it the ultimate strategic blueprint for navigating uncertainty? Or does this lack of strict enforcement render it too abstract to drive real operational resilience?
It's the classic tension between strategy and execution, really.
Oh, 100%.
So I will argue that ISO 31000's flexible, non-certifiable nature is actually its greatest strength. It transforms risk management from a rigid compliance exercise into a dynamic, organization-wide mindset that is absolutely essential for making decisions under uncertainty.
And I will argue that because ISO 31000 only offers guidance rather than strict requirements, it is fundamentally incomplete as a protective measure, unless it is subordinated to strict execution standards like ISO 27001.
Okay, let me start by unpacking why this mindset approach is so vital. At its core, ISO 31000 is trying to answer one profoundly difficult question.
Which is?
How do you make the best possible decisions when you don't have complete certainty?
Right.
It enables organizations to anticipate threats and opportunities, prioritize what matters most, and allocate resources effectively. And it accomplishes this through three distinct pillars, which are principles, a framework, and a process.
The basic architecture of the standard.
Yes, exactly. And the first pillar, the principles, sets the foundation by defining what effective risk management actually looks like. It says risk management must create and protect value.
Makes sense.
Right, and it has to be integrated into all organizational activities, structured and comprehensive, customized to the organization, and dynamic and responsive to change. Plus, it must be based on the best available information, consider human and cultural factors, and continually improve.
I mean, on paper, those sound like incredibly elegant goals.
Well, they're more than just goals. They are the mechanism that ensures risk management becomes an embedded mindset rather than just some isolated checklist. And this is why being non-certifiable is an intentional feature, not a bug.
Wait, a feature?
Yes. When a standard is certifiable, what happens? Organizations check boxes to satisfy an external auditor.
Because ISO 31000 relies on guidance rather than strict requirements, it forces genuine leadership commitment. It forces an organization to truly integrate these concepts into their governance, shifting them from reactive problem-solving to proactive resilience.
Look, I understand the appeal of that narrative. The standard paints a beautiful picture of what a mature organizational culture should look like, but we have to look closely at the important characteristics outlined in the text and its relationship with other standards.
Okay.
ISO 31000 explicitly states it is not certifiable. It is strictly focused on guidance, not strict requirements.
Which is exactly what allows it to be applicable to any organization, from a small startup to a massive global enterprise.
But at what operational cost? In high-stakes areas like cybersecurity, having a flexible mindset is simply not enough. The material itself admits this limitation. It positions ISO 31000 as risk thinking or strategy.
Right.
But risk thinking is utterly insufficient without a security system, which is what ISO 27001 provides, and cyber risk execution, which comes from ISO 27005.
Well,
strategy without execution is just theory. You can sit in a boardroom having the most structured, customized, dynamic thoughts imaginable. But real cyber resilience requires strict implementation of controls. Because it lacks strict enforcement mechanisms, ISO 31000 is incomplete.
I see why you frame it that way, but let's take a different perspective on the relationship between an overarching framework and strict rules. Let's look at the second pillar of ISO 31000, the framework.
Okay, go ahead.
This is about actually embedding risk into the organization's DNA. It requires leadership commitment and accountability, integration into governance, defined roles, responsibilities, and policies, as well as the explicit allocation of resources.
Right, it pushes the concept of risk into daily operations.
Exactly. It makes risk management strategic. Think about it like an architectural blueprint for a building. Isn't it logically necessary to have that overarching strategic design, the master blueprint, before you bring in the plumbers and electricians?
I see where you're going with this.
ISO 27001 and ISO 27005 are the plumbers and electricians. They provide the highly specialized implementation. But you cannot have effective execution without a blueprint to guide where the resources should actually go. Without ISO 31000, you're just installing security systems at random without understanding the organization's customized context.
I come at it from a different way. A blueprint is essential, sure. But if the architect says, here are some incredibly flexible guidelines for where the walls could go, but there are no strict building codes you actually have to follow, that building is going to collapse.
That's a bit of a leap.
Is it? Defining roles and responsibilities on paper is great for corporate optics, but the lack of strict requirements means an organization can claim they've adopted ISO 31000, boast to their shareholders about their dynamic risk mindset, and still completely fail to implement effective technical safety nets.
But isn't that just a failure of leadership rather than a failure of the standard itself?
If a standard relies entirely on perfect human leadership to function effectively, it's vulnerable. You called it an umbrella earlier. An umbrella gives you overarching coverage to keep your head dry, sure, but if you don't have waterproof boots on the ground to navigate the actual puddles, which are the strict technical controls, you're still going to sink.
Well, if you're listening to this and wondering, why do I need a separate, abstract framework just to tell my IT department to implement technical controls, you really have to understand the business reality of resource allocation.
Okay.
Let's look at how ISO 31000 practically shifts the entire organizational posture regarding cyber risk. Instead of reacting to attacks after they happen, organizations systematically identify threats. They look at phishing, ransomware, insider threats. They assess the likelihood and impact and prioritize based on actual business value.
You're talking about the third pillar now, the continuous 8-step process.
Exactly. It's not just a textbook list, it's a rigorous mechanism. You don't just guess at what might hurt you. You start by defining your scope and your context, understanding what actually matters to the business.
Right.
But the real magic happens in the middle stages. Instead of arbitrarily buying firewalls, you conduct a rigorous risk assessment. You identify the risk, analyze its likelihood, and evaluate its business impact. Only after that do you decide how to treat it.
But let's scrutinize that treatment phase, because the material gives us a very clear real-world cybersecurity example.
A company applying ISO 31000 identifies weak passwords as a risk. They analyze the likelihood as high and the impact as high, so they evaluate it as a priority risk.
Which proves the standard works perfectly to highlight critical vulnerabilities.
Highlighting the vulnerability isn't the same as fixing it. Look at the treatment in the text. To treat that risk, they implement multi-factor authentication, password policies, and employee training. The result is a reduced likelihood of breaches.
And that's a bad thing?
No, but here is my issue. ISO 31000 takes credit for that result, but the actual treatment, the MFA, the encryption protocols, the strict password configurations, those don't come from ISO 31000. They come from the strict security system of ISO 27001 and the cyber risk execution of ISO 27005.
Well,
ISO 31000 just pointed at the problem. It required specialized, strict execution to actually reduce the financial loss and protect the value.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning because you're treating identification and prioritization as if they're trivial administrative steps. They aren't. Let's talk about the counterintuitive reality of enterprise security. Having perfect security controls without risk intelligence means you might build an impenetrable fortress around the wrong asset.
How do you figure? Security is security.
Because you have a finite budget. If you don't use ISO 31000 to analyze the likelihood and the business impact first, you might spend millions of dollars applying ISO 27001's military-grade controls to your company's public cafeteria menu server while leaving your core customer database exposed because you ran out of funds.
Okay, fair point.
Right? ISO 31000 transforms cybersecurity from an IT expense into a business-driven risk strategy. It tells you where the fortress needs to be built. The fact that it utilizes ISO 27001 for the technical execution isn't a flaw. It's by design. They work together.
I totally agree they work together, but my argument is that ISO 31000 is fundamentally incomplete on its own. It claims to be a blueprint for managing risk, but it merely organizes the thoughts around risk.
It guides the decisions.
But if an organization adopts ISO 31000 but fails to implement the strict controls of ISO 27001, congratulations. They now have a highly sophisticated, well-documented awareness of the exact vulnerabilities that will destroy them.
But you're ignoring the vital factor of adaptability, which is the entire point of a flexible mindset, especially when we look at modern threats. Technical controls become obsolete.
They do, yes.
The specific requirements of execution standards age rapidly as technology evolves. We're living in a world of breakneck technological change. We're facing AI-driven threats, an increasing volume of cyber attacks, and massive global interconnected risks. If you rely solely on strict technical requirements, you will always be fighting yesterday's war.
That's a bold claim. You're saying strict execution requirements age poorly?
Absolutely they do. A strict requirement tells you exactly what to do based on the technology that existed the day the standard was published. But ISO 31000 relies on the monitoring and review cycle. It demands that the entire system be dynamic and responsive to change.
Okay.
It demands decisions be based on the best available information in real time. When an AI-driven threat mutates and circumvents your current firewall, a flexible framework allows your organization's leadership to immediately reassess the context, adjust the criteria, and reallocate resources without waiting years for a new technical standard to be drafted. The mindset is what keeps you agile.
That is a compelling argument. But have you considered that AI-driven threats demand the exact opposite response?
How so?
Complex, evolving algorithms don't respect a flexible organizational mindset. They exploit technical vulnerabilities at machine speed. Therefore, AI-driven threats demand greater technical precision and stricter automated operational mandates.
But how do you mandate a specific technical defense against something that changes its behavior autonomously every single hour?
By enforcing stricter baseline controls across the board. The overarching guidance of ISO 31000 is simply too broad to dictate specific defenses against something as complex as an AI attack. You can't just communicate and consult your way out of a zero-day exploit generated by artificial intelligence.
Well, No, of course not.
Proactive risk management fails if the overarching guidance lacks the strictness to force technical compliance on the network layer.
But ISO 31000 does force proactive action, just at a different layer. It explicitly requires the allocation of resources and continuous evaluation. If AI is the new threat, ISO 31000 provides the framework for leadership to recognize that the old technical controls are failing, evaluate the new impact on the business, and aggressively push resources toward finding a new solution.
Plus, let's go back to the principles. ISO 31000 demands we consider human and cultural factors. How does culture stop an AI attack?
Because the weakest link is almost always human. A strict technical execution standard just mandates a password policy. But the ISO 31000 mindset asks, why are our employees exhausted and bypassing the security policy in the first place?
Right.
Are the technical controls too burdensome for their daily workflow? It ensures the organization's human and cultural elements are aligned to tackle the problem, rather than just waiting for an auditor to tell them they failed a compliance check.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that a non-certifiable standard creates that necessary level of urgency on its own. When push comes to shove, organizations prioritize what they are audited against.
That's a cynical view.
It's realistic. The lack of certification ability means there's no external forcing function. It relies entirely on voluntary excellence. And in a landscape defined by global interconnected risks and severe financial losses on the line, voluntary excellence is a massive gamble.
It isn't a gamble. It's the very foundation of building trust with your stakeholders. Organizations that adopt ISO 31000 effectively make better strategic decisions because they internalize the process. They actually strengthen their compliance and governance because they finally understand the why behind the rules, rather than just blindly following the what to pass an audit.
I agree that understanding the why is important. It's certainly vital for building trust across departments. But I stand by the reality that to actually improve cyber resilience and stop a breach, you need the strict mandates of the execution standards.
Well, let's look at how this all comes together as we wrap up our discussion today. I've argued that ISO 31000 is the indispensable global umbrella for risk management. By remaining flexible, non-certifiable, and applicable to all types of risk, not just cyber, but financial, reputational, operational, and strategic, it empowers organizations to truly anticipate both opportunities and threats.
Right.
It forces risk management to transcend IT checklists and become a dynamic, organizational-wide mindset. This drives better strategic decisions and moves an organization from reactive problem-solving to true proactive resilience.
And my summary is that while ISO 31000 provides a highly valuable 8-step process and a strategic framework for understanding risk, its non-certifiable nature remains a critical limitation. Because it is focused entirely on broad guidance rather than strict requirements, it must fundamentally rely on the strict execution mechanics of specialized standards like ISO 27001 and ISO 27005 to actually protect value and reduce financial losses in the real world. Strategy is useless without execution.
Though we differ on the balance of flexibility versus strictness, I think we've found some significant points of convergence today. We both acknowledge that ISO 31000 successfully defines a comprehensive vocabulary for an organization.
Yes, definitely. The 3 pillars and the continuous cycle of communication, analysis, and treatment provide a much-needed shared language between the boardroom and the IT department.
And we also agree that managing uncertainty is the defining challenge of modern organizational governance. Whether you rely more on the flexible master blueprints or the strict building codes, the rigorous anticipation of risk is non-negotiable in today's interconnected landscape.
Absolutely. The days of simply waiting to react to a problem after it hits your servers are over.
We will leave it to you, our listeners, to form your own conclusion regarding the right balance between a flexible strategic mindset and strict technical execution within your own organizations.
And as a final reminder, please be sure to visit WeCyberYou.com and follow the channel for deeper explorations into material exactly like this.
When you look at the architecture of your own organization's risk strategy, you have to ask yourself, do you just have a random collection of alarms and reinforced doors? Or do you actually have a master blueprint guiding exactly where they should be placed to protect what matters most? Thank you for joining us on The Debate.